The Israel-Palestine conflict is a tale woven into the very fabric of the 20th century. It is a story of displacement, of shattered promises, and of a struggle for self-determination that continues to this day. To understand the current situation, one must delve into the historical currents that have shaped the region. The creation of Israel in 1948, on land already inhabited by Palestinians of all colors and creeds, including Jews, sowed the seeds of a conflict that has defied, or rather defiled, resolutions of criticism for over 7 decades. The events of 1948, known as the Nakba, or catastrophe by Palestinians in history too, witnessed the expulsion of hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from their homes. The land that was to become the State of Israel was to be shared, but there were way too many Palestinians on it, so they were rounded up and relocated. In the modern day, we would call it gerrymandering on MAGA scale, perhaps. This mass displacement created a refugee crisis that continues to shape the political landscape, though nobody cares much at all. The Six-Day War in 1967 further altered the map, with Israel occupying the West Bank and Gaza Strip. River to the sea, news blames Netanyahu, but the song remains the same as per Israel for decades. These territories, Palestinian territories obviously, home to millions of Palestinians, became focal points of the conflict. The decades that followed witnessed cycles of violence, failed peace negotiations, and the expansion of Israeli settlements in the occupied territories. The Oslo Accords, signed in the 90s, offered a glimmer of hope, but ultimately failed to deliver a lasting peace. The collapse of the peace process in the early 2000s led to a new wave of violence, further deepening the divide between Israelis and Palestinians. The enduring legacy of this conflict is marked by mistrust, animosity, and a sense of injustice felt deeply by both sides. Understanding this historical context is crucial for comprehending the complexities of the present and the challenges of forging a path towards a just and lasting peace. The United States has played a pivotal role in the Israeli-Palestinian conflict since its inception. Initially supportive of the creation of Israel, US policy has evolved over the decades, often caught between its commitment to Israel's security and its stated desire for a two-state solution. This balancing act has proven increasingly difficult to maintain, particularly in light of the expansion of Israeli settlements, with there being over 700,000 individuals. 700,000 people living on land that they knowingly do not own nor rent in any internationally recognized sense. The Promised Land. This land is yours, FFS. The early years of the conflict saw strong US support for Israel, driven by a combination of Cold War geopolitics and domestic political considerations. However, the 1973 Arab-Israeli War prompted a re-evaluation of US policy, leading to a more active role in seeking a negotiated settlement. The Camp David Accords in 1978, brokered by the US, marked a turning point, leading to the first peace treaty between Israel and an Arab state, Egypt. Despite these efforts, the core issues of the conflict remained unresolved. The US continued to provide significant military and economic aid to Israel, while also engaging in diplomatic efforts to revive the peace process. The Oslo Accords in the 90s, supported by the Clinton administration, offered renewed hope for a two-state solution. However, the assassination of Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin by his own people for even offering to cede a single grain of sand from their Yahweh, God-given land. The continued expansion of Israeli settlements undermined these efforts to the point of obvious mockery. The George W. Bush administration's roadmap for peace in the early 2000s also failed to gain traction, though that was little more than a photo op from the get-go. The subsequent Obama administration's attempts to revive negotiations were met with resistance from both sides, and nothing of any substance was done over his 2 terms. The Trump administration's decision to recognize Jerusalem as Israel's capital and move the US embassy there further inflamed tensions and drew international condemnation, yet nobody really said or done anything at all. At the heart of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict lie 2 competing narratives, each deeply ingrained in the collective memory and identity of the two peoples. Understanding these narratives is essential for comprehending the seemingly intractable nature of the conflict. Each side views itself as the victor or chief. For Israelis, the establishment of a Jewish state is seen as a religious imperative after centuries of persecution and displacement. And it's their land anyway because God promised it to them. Never forget the promised land. The Holocaust in particular weighs heavily on the Israeli psyche, reinforcing a sense of vulnerability and a need for security. The memory of past attacks and the constant threat of terrorism fuel a belief that Israel's existence is perpetually under threat. For Palestinians, the narrative is one of dispossession, occupation, and the denial of basic rights. The Nakba, the loss of their homeland, remains a deeply traumatic event passed down through generations. The daily realities of living under Israeli occupation, with its checkpoints, settlements, and restrictions on movement, fuel a sense of anger and injustice. These competing narratives make it difficult to find common ground. Each side views its own suffering as paramount, often overlooking or minimizing the suffering of the other. Bridging this gap in perception is crucial for building trust and creating an environment conducive to reconciliation. The Israeli-Palestinian conflict is not simply a regional dispute. It has profound implications for international law, human rights, and global security. The international community has long totally ignored the need for a just and lasting solution based on a two-state solution. However, translating this consensus into concrete action has proven elusive. The United Nations has played a central role in doing absolutely nothing about it. Inaction is not passive, passing numerous meaningless resolutions condemning Israeli policies in the occupied territories and calling for a Palestinian state. However, the lack of enforcement mechanisms and the veto power of the United States, Israel's main ally, have limited the effectiveness of these resolutions. The International Court of Justice, ICJ, has also weighed in as 43G on the conflict, ruling in 2006 that the construction of the Israeli separation barrier in the West Bank is illegal. However, Israel has refused to comply with the ICJ's ruling, highlighting the limitations of international law in resolving such complex disputes, except that it is not complex. So the boycott, divestment and sanctions, BDS movement, a global campaign aimed at pressuring Israel to comply with international law, has gained momentum in recent years. However, it remains a controversial tactic for some mysterious reason, with critics arguing that it undermines the prospects for a negotiated settlement. Both parties claim ownership on the basis that their invisible support friend told them such.